Thank you for staying with Daybreak. We are calling this the 2024 Outlook, and we'd like to hear from a young panelists here and find out what their greatest concerns are and what they think government should do going forward and what they want to do as well. As we take a look at the 2024 just beginning now, there's a lot going on in the dailies, but let me introduce my guest first. Muthiora Karriara is here, former presidential running mate. Asante sana for making time. Next to him is Njeri Kahiga, youth leader. Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.
And we have Mohamed Abdullahi, law student. Asante sana for making time. And then we have Arnold Maliba, strategic communication and advisor, UDA. Thank you very much for making time. All right, so now let's take a look. Let's start off with which direction you think the country is heading, Muthiora, before we even get into the details, because there's a lot going on the dailies. But first, as we start off 2024, which direction are we heading as a country? Wrong direction or right direction?
Well, we're still on a wrong trajectory, especially considering how the year has begun. We've seen the executive and a section of the Kenya Kwanza legislative arm attack the judiciary, and that cannot be a good thing. We had a lot of other issues that were unresolved in the previous year, but then adding these to the list of things that the country has to grapple with, we clearly are still in the wrong direction.
Okay. So you're basing this direction on the tiff between judiciary and executive?
Well, and the state of our economy. You recall that last year a lot of targets remained unmet as far as employment statistics are concerned. You look at the GDP, the rate at which we had hoped that ours would expand, that was not quite met. And then, of course, look at the cost of living. That remains a big thorn in the flesh. So when you add another very critical item, such as an attack on the independence of the judiciary, we clearly are not trying to get ourselves out of the hole we dug ourselves into.
Okay. Jerry, which direction are we heading as a country?
I want to also say that we are heading in a very wrong direction as a country, and I want to base this on the fact that it's school opening errands that are being run right now. And it's very sad to when you hear parents talk about we have moved from the government subsidy of education, and right now it's almost entirely for the parents to fund their children, because when we talk of the last regime that was giving a capitation of almost 22,000 per each student, and right now we've declined to 12,000, and you have not reduced taxation. You are still overtaxing Kenyans, but you are decreasing the amount that you are giving per each student. It's very worrying. We also want to base it on the fact that it's new year. We were expecting parents to start off with some bit of relief. I saw over the December holiday, the president took relief food to his home county back in Sugoi. But when we start the year, we are hearing of members of parliament and parents complaining that CDF funds have not yet been released. Bursaries back in the counties, it's still the normal 2,000, 3,000, yet you've increased the amount that the parent is supposed to contribute to the school fees. And it's very saddening because we're also talking about KCSE, KCP transition. We are starting a year with a regime that is going to be the first one to move away from 100% transition from KCP, KCSE. Then, of course, going to the university, there's also going to be a decline. And you've seen the results that we've had. You can imagine when we are talking of national exams, but somebody in the morning has a B minus, then in the afternoon, the same person has an A minus. And we are still talking about education reforms. We are still talking about quality education. So if that is how the government is leading, what are the students supposed to do? And these are nationally set exams. So we've started on the wrong foot, especially on the education sector.
All right.
Yes.
Yeah, Trevor, I think I share in the same sentiments as well, that our outlook of 2024 as citizens of this country would have been better if we're hopeful that things would at least improve. But I don't think we see a lot of hope in a lot of things. I don't think we see hope, at least in the short term, that the cost of living is going to reduce. We do not see, at least in the short term, that the economy is going to grow. In the short term, all of the proposals are things of let's start collecting 5% tax on every farmer's produce. affordable housing will happen regardless of what people think, and the president sort of arming one section of the society against that. It is still some people who want the affordable housing against those who do not want the affordable housing. So it's I think there isn't a lot of hope that things would improve. We would want to be hopeful that 2023 was a tough year. It was his first year in office, but at least that 2024 is going to be a better one. I don't think a lot of Kenyans have that hope.
Okay. Maliba?
First of all, I think I have got quite, contrary to what the three have actually said, I've got quite a positive expectation of this particular year, because I think last year was the doom's year. That you can check. If you are a reader, you are a consumer of public information, you would actually have seen that last year was a year where, as a country, we were expected to default and therefore get into zones where countries like Ghana have been, with inflation at some point going up to 100%. It's now, I think, down in Ghana up to 38%. It also had been projected, and that is something that had gone back so many years, that the economy would tank last year. So if we survived, in the words of Kwonko, that if we survived last year, I think this year is much better, because the big elephant in the room was, first of all, the issue of debt, and specifically debt distress, something that the administration has actually tactfully and, of course, very difficult, with the support of Kenyans. No one really loves to go through hard times, but then hard times sometimes find us. So instead of us going back and asking how we got ourselves into where we are today, it will be better that we actually focus on looking at how we get out of this place. First of all, the president and even the government have actually, and if you looked at his end year speech, that times were hard, but then he actually thanked Kenyans that we actually together pushed out from what Kirinyaga Governor Anne Waiguru said, that we got the patient out of the HDU. He's in ICU. I'm looking forward to having the patient move to the general wards in this first quarter, in this last quarter, and by the time we get into the very last quarter of the year, of course we've got one quarter to this year, quote unquote. If you're looking at the financial year cycle, I expect that by mid-year, the patient can actually go home. We're looking at properly, I'm looking at the economic level. And then from that ends, then we can actually then be on the runway ready for taxing. So what he's been doing for most of the year, and he's not really shied away from telling us that things are bad. I know there's been too much. This is a political, he runs a country, he doesn't run a church, so you do not expect that things, even the dialogue is easier. So I choose to look at it because we survived last year when we were expected to go bust. I think this year at the macro level, we will actually be able to stabilize. Secondly, I am looking forward to Kenyans being more positive about their own country, because there is a word, Trevor, called oikophobia. You can look it up. Oikophobia is the disposition or the felt need to always hate one's kind. A lot of times we use it as the opposite of patriotism. I don't want to call for nationalism. Nationalism has got so many streaks to it that you wouldn't really want to look into. Let's talk about patriotism as a first. So in the name of calling out government and everything else, you realize that sometimes a society, and especially we Kenyans, have become oikophobes, where we deliberately are latching on anything negative about our country. You have watched social media, you've watched the media last year. People taking a lot of time to only focus on the negative things, even though if you looked, you didn't need to struggle. You will actually see a lot of good things that come out of this country. So in the name of calling out of a country, you know, Kenyans will trash their own country, but then feel so bad if another person trash their own country. But you've already done that. By the way,
so enumerate for me what is working right now.
There is an African saying that if you declare your calabash useless, then the others will actually support you by putting rubbish in it.
So we have got one country, and you can actually hate the regime of the day. You can criticize it. You can call out the government of the day. But hating your own country to the level where we are getting to sabotage level.
Yeah, I'm waiting to hear you.
I will actually,
because they talked about specific issues, school fees,
I have spoken about the
CDF, economy, judiciary, and the executive team.
I've actually taken time to actually talk about the economic outlook at macro level. First of all, the debt distress. I actually spoke about that very well. That then eases our cash, or rather our cash books, to the level where we can then access affordable credit. Number one, to actually ensure that the country is running, the programs are taken care of. And then when we are able to raise proper resources, that way you then spur economic growth. I have had a lot of drama and stories around that. If eventually later on in the debate we can look at that. Then, of course, I am expecting a very robust, politically, I expect a very robust political year, because we expect the NADCO report to be adopted by Parliament, even though as a person, I would really have loved us to have NADCO 3 to talk about what the President has brought up. And I think Mudhiora raised the issue about the judiciary. I would love, as a country, probably, if it were possible, we would then probably have another part of it, because I think it's not an area well covered in the NADCO report, and that we are having that particular conversation. I think it would be better that the country, again, talks about accountability in the judiciary, but then at a level where all of us are having a platform to talk about it. Okay. So I'm looking forward to a very robust year. I see people already priming up for 2027. I see we have got 6 by-elections, at least up to this particular point, that if IEBC is actually established, we will actually go back to the polls. Those are things that I'm looking forward to inform this particular year. But they are good things. For the first time in primary schools, there is no class 8. So we then now have a little bit of more facilities that weren't there, both to serve the junior secondary and probably just speak to the population down here. It's a year for us which is actually a transformational year, or rather a year that is leading us to different spaces that we've not been before. So there's much to look forward to. Small things here and there. We shouldn't be majoring on minors and minoring on the majors, the way I see a lot of times when we do criticism. But be that as it is, it's given in the Constitution, it should be out there. What I would really love to call for, especially for young people, this is a young people's panel, for example, and the outlook, if you hear the first tone, if the salvo they are giving out is a very negative one, yet the nation runs on the cogs of young people, yet the people who make this country work are young people. If the young people feel this, and you know, you've looked for some of the best that you could get sitting here. If they are this sad, then what about those that you've left out there?
So you want them to be
we cannot be radiating negative energy.
Now that we spent the years, let's start with Abdullah, then I'll come to you. Okay. Yes.
So, Trevor, my colleague talks about I'll go to the last thing he talks about, which is education, that junior secondary. This says there are no teachers. There's a shortage, of 42,000 teachers. There are no textbooks. Teachers do not know what textbooks to use for junior secondary education. That there is no proper curriculum to be used for those kids who are transitioning from lower primary to junior secondary. So what is this hula baloo about this great education that we're having for our kids? There's absolutely nothing. He talks about that the patient has moved from HDU to ICU, the general ward, and then probably the patient will be going home. I think to the contrary, the patient is actually going to the HDU, and Trevor, in terms of taxation, the patient is being overtaxed. In terms of the economy is hardly growing. The government is competing for local debt with private enterprises at 15, 17% interest rate. Where are local businesses, small, medium enterprises going to access credit from? All of that he does not talk about. He tells you that health-wise, there were medical equipment procured expensively. If I remember during the times of Cleopa Mailu as the cabinet secretary, something to the tune of 63 billion. There were a lot of questions raised. Those equipments dilapidated, not serviced. They are lying idle in hospitals across the country for many, many years. That is the state of our healthcare. Small rains happened. You saw the damage it caused to the infrastructure in these countries. Counties were cut off from the rest of the country for weeks on end. That is the state of our infrastructure. Small rains happen. Our national airport is leaking. Now we have to find a committee to tell us which section of the airport is leaking and which section of it we should renovate and all of those things. So there's really nothing concrete to be hopeful about. My friend could talk about why the youth are central to the country and why they need to be hopeful and all of those things. But we can only rally behind concrete things which we can feel. Our parents are complaining about how more expensive it is to educate us and our siblings and all of these things. So there's really nothing concrete. Tell us what is concrete that we stand behind. Okay. We do not see those concrete things.
Okay, Mudiora.
Yes, we left off 2023 having concluded that our government has devised lying as a tool to govern. In the speech that the president gave, he spoke about how Kenya is a visa-free country, but we know he didn't quite mean that it would be free, because the ETA that was introduced is actually creating a hurdle, and the world out there has seen through the lie that was spoken in New Year's Eve. So at least I had hoped the lies we went through since this government took office would end in 2024. But clearly, that hasn't happened. We are likely to have the biggest budget that Kenya has ever run. The projections are that it's going to be in the tune of 4.2 trillion. That burden is going to be on Kenyans. We breached the debt ceiling. We are now well beyond the 10 trillion mark. They thought that if they pegged our debt ceiling to the GDP, they would have leeway to play around with the figures. And now they realize that even the 55% to GDP that they thought would work is way too low. They want to take it to 68%. This is a government that had promised Kenyans that it would cut on debt, yet they are looking to increase space for them to borrow more, and there is no way that's going to lessen the burden on Kenyans. I have heard Maliba challenge Kenya's young people to be optimistic, to be hopeful. We would really love to do that. But then, if our own neighbors are telling us that we are not sitting pretty, we should listen. Because there was a time when I could take 100,000 Kenya shillings not so long ago and go to Tanzania and get 21 million. Right now, I can only get about 15 million Tanzanian shillings for the same amount. Clearly, there's what our neighbors are doing that we should be doing. So if you're asking me to sit pretty and be hopeful when clearly I can see the steps that are being taken by our government are not addressing that, that's going to be a bit hard.
Okay. Jerry?
It's very saddening that in a panel of 4 people, he feels that 3 of us are negative. And you see, sometimes we say the majority always win. Nobody wants this government to fail, because if this government fails when we're in our prime years, it's also a loss to us. But we cannot sit pretty and entertain a government that is overtaxing us and still giving us below bare minimums. Why we have 5-star hotels and 1-star hotel is because the things that you pay for in 5-star hotel, you cannot get them at a 1-star hotel. So you are telling me, he kept on mentioning that we are surviving as a nation. But I lack to understand, why should I be surviving as a Kenyan, yet you're overtaxing me? If you are overtaxing me, I have to live to the standards of how I'm being taxed. It has to have a relation. You cannot be overtaxing me and still telling me, you know what, I can't give you education subsidy. You know what? I can't give you a fuel subsidy. You know what? You have to wait for me to do 2, 3, 4 years for me to start telling the nation that this money that I deducted from Kenyans, I have built houses. And on the affordable housing, I want to wonder, the last regime, Uhuru did affordable houses, over 20,000 of them. That this government is now commissioning, and we have seen them go around commissioning. And when Uhuru was in government, those houses used to go for about 1 to 1.2 million. Right now, as they sell them, they are doing them at 4 to 3.5 million, thereabout. Yet, that time, Uhuru never used to deduct the 3% on house levy. But they want to still deduct the 3% levy, overprice those houses such that the private sector is offering cheaper houses than the government. Yet private sectors is funding itself. Yet the government is deducting Kenyans. You can imagine you are deducting somebody who has not been, has a salary raise for the longest time. And this is the same person that you expect. For instance, every teacher in this nation, once they become a teacher or a permanent and pensionable employee, the first thing that they do is invest in properties. Now, at the age of 40, you are telling this person to contribute to a hustle pale mashinani so that they can get employed. How are we going to balance those who already did their houses when they got their salaries, and you expect them to contribute so that you can sell 2 times the amount that a private sector is doing to that hustler person that you're talking about? When he talks of this government, young people should be very positive. I like to understand, how should I be positive? Yet we are being told we need to be taken to overseas. I have been going to overseas, taking trips left, right, and center because I'm looking for opportunities overseas. Is the president telling Kenyans that we need to be doing a brain drain overseas? Then who is left to run this country? Who is left to maintain and take this government to the next level, or this nation to the next level? So I want to simply tell my colleague, when you listen to people talk about critical issues of this nation, they are not negative. They are just saying things as they are. And sometimes it's important when the king is told he's naked. You cannot tell him, no, you are shining. No, you need to tell him he's naked. Because if you don't, at the end of the day, we are all losing. But because they sit at the table and eat and drink, they assume it's every other Kenyan that does that. Right now, the hustler people that they campaigned on. You saw the other day, Buddha riders said they want to take the president to court because he misused them. We are talking about Mama Mboga right now. My friend here has talked about they are taxing farmers 5%. Yet you campaigned on a hustler nation narrative and talked about mtu wa chini. Yet right now, that is the person that you are oppressing more. And those who want to buy private choppers, no taxation. Ule mwenye analima mboga, you want to overtax them. So I think people need to understand that we can never sit down and allow this government continue doing the things that they do to the young people.
All right, I have to take a quick commercial break. I'll give you a chance to respond, Arnold, on this, but also Mudiora, I know you have something to say, but let's take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we'd like to hear from you as well at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. What concerns you the most, and what do you suggest as a solution going forward? That's the other thing that we need to focus on. So what do we do from here? We may talk about the issues that we're facing, but what do you suggest as solutions going forward? All right, at Trevor Mbija at Citizen TV Kenya. Use the hashtag Daybreak. See you in just a bit.